how to shingle the old mat houses by the way the basalt was formed. Okay, so you see it in those different layers, and it kind of steps down. And then if you look at the old pictures of the mat houses, that's kind of how they're stepped down like that. And that was at least one interpretation of this is what inspired us to shingle our structures like you see them in the old pictures. See, what else am I missing in here, Rich?
Well, you talked a little bit about the dogwood, and Dewey just gave us the name, and I'll have him pronounce it
okay.
again, and which relates to a place too. So it's, say it again loud, Dewey, so I'll...
Kamia.
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 Okay. And what's where the name of the place Kamia derives from?
This plant was very, what they call in academic world, very cosmopolitan. So it grew anywhere there was water. Wenatchee, anywhere there was water, they used that plant for. That was a primary go-to source for cordage, twining. A lot of the old-time Indian nets. You know, we're talking about big hog salmon too. Okay, that was. I mean, they used other types of cordage. But that was one of the go-to because it's so endemic and so cosmopolitan to the whole Columbia Plateau. And the reason you don't see it in modern times is because modern agriculture or colonial peoples have removed it out of the landscape. If you break, it's a species, there's a short dog bane and a tall dog bane. Often the short one comes in after the fires. And if you break that twig, there's a milky substance that comes out of that. Now, there's two truths. One is that milky substance is toxic, but the other truth is it takes a lot of it for that to be toxic to you or to any animal organisms. They will only eat that plant if there's nothing else. So that talks to bad colonial human management. That's not the plant's fault, and it's not the animal's fault. It's because they don't have other plants they're not feeding them properly, they're not ranging them properly inside fence structures. So that used to be just like tule. It used to be everywhere, and these plants because they've been replaced by eastern plants or plants from Europe or Mediterranean. We don't see those. So we have what we look at is a snapshot of a totally different landscape of the western U.S. or inland Northwest. Keep that in mind, but there's enough remnants for us to like, what did it really look like? What were the plants that really dominated the area? And then that will tell you what did the people use prolifically, in the shape of cordage or structural plants for sweat houses, depend on what area they're from.
So before they built that railroad there, that plant would have been all along that.
It would have been along there, and it would have been bigger. And when you harvest these things, it has the effect of a greater growth of scarification, which kind of alters the plant and can in a good way. Okay, that collection will have very positive effects when a community or people keep going back to it. So if you see a camas ground with a lot of different species, that's because no one's dug there. The competing plant species have invaded the camas area because the people are out of the scene now. All right. Once the people get back in the scene, it takes on a whole different character. Places like Grangeville and Ellensburg, even the pioneer documentation say those were seas of purple, seas of blue, because all pure camas. But that took human interaction, human interface to keep those gathering areas prime. And people say, well, they always talk about death camas being here, but death camas does like the same site. I've seen like near Pullman and Moscow, I've seen the roots growing with each other, right? But if the people are in there, they make sure the death camas doesn't get in mussel shell, okay, or packer meadow or whatever. That's why they don't find a lot of other species in there like that would naturally want to kind of gradually infest that area. In America, there's dark rocks, light rocks, and really light rocks. Okay, that's my whole.
So, this is a greenstone. It often has white specks in it, but it's a very fine-grained rock, and it can be a very fine-grained, just plain green rock, and it's very hard. And so conceivably it could make some tools, but it's a metamorphosed basalt. In other words, it's about a 310 million year old basalt that's been heated and pressurized, and the minerals have changed somewhat. So instead of being black like a basalt, it's turned into a very dark green rock. In your sort of set of pictures, you have the greenstone, and I noticed that in Aoki, which is the 1965 Nez Perce Dictionary. Rich, do you remember the date?
Yeah, well, that's about
somewhere
that.
out in there. There are, instead of just a Nez Perce word for rock, he has a Nez Perce word for, there's two different words for green rock. There's two different words for white rock, and there's a word for hard black rock. So I'm thinking that, and then there are a few other words for, there's no soft rock, but then there are other words for rock pile or talus slope, and he's not clear about whether he's talking about a pile of rocks or a talus slope, which would be these.
So does anybody have a word for that slope there, that talus, that rock?
H2H, that's one word I would think of.
H2H?
Side, like the side of a hill. Tilao for different words.
This one here actually is a rock that has a stripe in it, has a couple of stripes in it. So it looks to me as though it's a sandstone, because it has these, you can see the layers.
Does have layers, yeah.
But it's a very, very hard, very polished rock. There's no reason that these sandstones, like the greenstones, have all been metamorphosed. So all their crystals have become interlocked, and so as a consequence, they're much harder than a regular sandstone if you were to go to Utah, for example. So in your collection of photos of rocks, there's also some red rocks that we call scoria, that are basalt that had a lot of air and water going through it when it was cool. So I'm not sure what that would be used for, but I know that Aoki has a specific word for scoria, or for red rocks.
For red rock.
Yeah.
Is it a
Yeah.
weight?
If you look up at the clips here, you can see that there are columns, right? So when this rock cools, it forms columns. And when you're coming down through the coulee, you'll see a lot of columnar, what we call columnar basalt. And in some places in Wallowa County, there are really nice columnar basalt, other places there aren't. So you've got some pictures of columnar basalt, just to see if there's any, if that brings anything to mind. There are much bigger features too. So I know that there's, a word for when rivers come together at 90 degrees, that come together like this, or when rivers come together at an angle like this. And yesterday I was listening to Nakia Williamson give a talk about the Nez Perce. He was talking at the Oregon Lakes Association. So there was a lot of discussion of salmon, and Nakia said that where the rivers came together at 90 degrees, there was often a lot more wood and debris deposited in that area. And so that's where people would have their pit houses and village houses sometimes, because there was more wood, and that also might have been a good place to catch salmon.
Is that Seminicum, or the two come off each other?
Dominican?
Yeah, and to geologists, that's a significant difference. It's a structural difference.